Good morning and welcome everyone to our webinar. Our apologies for the glitches in the beginning and for starting just a few minutes late. We had some technical difficulties, but thank you for being patient with us and thank you for making time to join us today. For those that don't know me, my name is Fulubera Tambani. I am the Science Communications Specialist for the NSCF. And I will be introducing the webinar today. So just so we don't have the guidelines slide up today, but I'm just going to remind us of how to treat each other when we are in this space. We please ask you to be considerate of the host as well as other participants. And please use the chat to say hello right away. I see we have people that have already started because it's our tradition. So when you know your tradition, you get to that place and you do what is done there. So thank you, Daniela, Mashatse, and Kirsten, Chantel. Good morning, everyone. So let's greet each other in the chat. And just let us know where you are joining the webinar from, so your institution, and if you feel like it, you can let us know how you are today. So while we get that going, you can also use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions. So you can place your questions there. This is just to make sure that we don't miss your questions. As you know, the chat gets filled up quite quickly. So as we go through the webinar, whatever question comes up, even the one that you came with, you can place it in the Q&A box. We will try to make sure that all questions are answered. If not, because of time, please make sure that you add it to the webinar link, YouTube recording. So with that, we can now go on to Michelle. It's Michelle Hamer, the NSCF lead, and she will walk us through today's topic, which is collections management and curation planning, our last webinar for the course. I feel like it's a major thing since we've been doing this for more than a year. So, Michelle?
Okay, thanks, Fulu. And yeah, thanks for highlighting the fact that this is our last webinar for the year, but it's also the last webinar that's part of the series for implementation of the manual and for the training course that we've been running. So it is quite a big event. And yeah, this was a very difficult webinar to put together because we don't have anything documented on curation and collection management planning. And so it was kind of starting from scratch. So it was quite a difficult one to put together. Okay, so what we're going to be covering today, we're going to say, well, we're going to talk about why we need a plan, and then look at what do we mean by a collection management and curation plan, what is it? And then talk about how it's linked to the NSCF manual, and then how to develop the plan. How do you go about developing a collection management and curation plan? And then look at implementation. So how do you make sure that your plan is implemented? And then monitoring progress and performance and review of the plan. So those are the topics we'll be covering today. So we often talk about collection management, but if you look at what sound management means, so what does management mean? Means clarification of goals and priorities, associated strategic planning, so what's strategic, and then development of necessary monitoring systems and leadership. So there's four main parts of sound management. And I took these out of an article, it's quite old, 1993, but it's still very relevant today. And it's an article about where's the management in collections management. So planning for improving collections. And when we talk about collections management, are these 4 points covered? Is this what we're doing? So when we go through today, the content today, you'll be able to assess whether you are managing in a proper management way. So why do we need a plan? We know what we need to do in the collection. We do all kinds of curation things and loans and visitors, databasing and all of those kinds of things. And most institutions have an annual performance plan. I think if you fall under government, you have to have one, or you have a 5-year strategic plan, or you have both. And if you look at those documents, they cover all kinds of things: finance, HR, education, outreach, exhibits, facilities maintenance, and research. So they cover everything that the institution does. And in some of them, they do have some curation or collection or data management outputs or deliverables and targets. So they do, I think most of them do. And then also, if you look at staff performance agreements or work plans, so again, I think most people sign a performance agreement every year, and you've probably got some kind of targets in there: so many specimens accessioned, so many records captured, so many loans sent out. So we've got all of these things included in plans, but where do they come from? So are they just random things put in there? So things like new specimens accession, number of records captured, number of loans sent out. So are they just there, or are they part of a bigger plan? A plan that's focused on the collections. And what is the overall goal? So where are you going with this? Or is it just doing things the same every day, year after year after year? So are you just staying in the same place, doing the same things, dealing with the same things? And in that article, I put the reference up for in the previous slide. We call that collections ad hocing. So when you don't know where you're going, you don't have a plan, you just do things. It's dealing with problems and opportunities as they become apparent and seem important at the time. So there's no long-term thinking about where you need to go and what you need to do to get there. It's just doing things. And an ad hoc approach is often based on what each individual wants to do. So there's no plan for the institution. It's just what everybody wants to do themselves, and everybody's off doing their own thing. And what often happens is it leads to collapsed projects. So somebody decides they're going to do this, they're going to start at this collection or at that collection, but there's no plan for it. There's no resource allocation. And what happens is it collapses over time. Or critical activities get neglected while somebody's off doing something that they want to do. So what you end up with is a complete waste of staff time and money. So resources, it costs money to do these things, but it's not in the plan. So that's a very high risk to the long-term sustainability of the collections. A lot of people will say we don't want a plan, we don't need a plan, we know what we're doing, we don't have to write it down, and I hate all that strategic planning stuff, we do it, it's just a load of rubbish. And often people don't want a plan because it means that they can be held accountable. So if you commit to something on paper, it means someone can check up on you, and no one likes that. But we have to recognize that we've got diminishing funding. So every institution is getting less and less money every year. It's the economic climate in our country and globally. And staff, we're not getting more staff. Some institutions are having less and less staff. There are big risks to the collections that need to be addressed. And so planning and accountability are essential. We can't just keep ad hocing and everybody deciding what they're going to do on their own and not thinking carefully. So without a plan, it's impossible to work in a systematic way to address the main risks to the collections. To increase use of those collections, because we've said that's critically important. to have a fully digitized version of the collection, and to allocate staff and funding to deal with priority activities in a meaningful and productive way. So you can't really achieve much unless you have a plan. Without a plan, it's impossible to say that you don't have enough staff or budgets. The question will be to do what? What are your plans to show where these shortages are and how you're currently allocating your resources? And by resources, we mean people and their time and budget. So if somebody asked you to show that the time of all staff is 100% full and that you've still got gaps in what needs to be done, can you present the plan to do that? So we hear this all the time. We don't have enough staff, we don't have enough budget, but where are the plans that show that? And then, you know, not having a plan is like starting a road trip with no map, no GPS, no kilometer counter on your car. You have no idea where you're going. You have no idea how far you still have to go or how far you've come. It's just working blindly. And so if you don't have that plan, how do you monitor your progress? How do you know if you're making progress? So how is this linked? How is a plan linked to the manual implementation? We've been talking a lot about manual implementation. And so how is the plan for collection management and curation linked to the manual? So this manual serves as the standard for collections management and curation or care in the absence of another formal system. So in South Africa, we don't have like an ISO or some other kind of accreditation, and we're working according to the manual. It's based on best global practice. So ideally, institutions, collections should work towards implementing the manual. Meeting the requirements in the manual will help to ensure that the collections are managed in a professional and scientific way, so that they have credibility when anybody wants to use that collection for scientific research or the data for spatial planning or EIAs. It's credible. It's implementation, we recognize it's likely to take time and effort. It's not instant. And a plan is needed to get anywhere. So to know how far you've come, how far you've still got to go, who needs to do what, you need that plan to implement the manual. And just a really important point is that implementing the manual is not separate work of collection staff. So we often hear, you know, the NSCF work and the manual, it's so much extra work and we don't have time to do that because we're caring for the collections. Well, the manual is caring for the collections. It's the work of people who work in the collections. This is the work. So it might mean a different way of working to what you currently work. There may be new things to do, but they're not NSCF things. They're things that should be done by staff working in collections. So some staff are implementing the manual. We know that from various discussions, and there's lots of different approaches that are being used. So in some institutions, it's an individual being assigned responsibility to implement the manual. Some institutions are working with some bits of some chapters and some sections. Some institutions, some collections are implementing, but not others. And I'm not sure whether there are any documented plans, like a plan, a written plan for how you're going to implement the manual. Overall, I don't know. And what we've realized is that this is a gap in the manual. So we don't provide the guidance in the manual for how to implement and how to do the plan. And that's what we're talking about today. But if we revise the manual in future, we're going to have to include a section on this. It's really critically important. So what is a collection management or curation plan? What's in it and how, where do you even start with it? So the first thing, it has to include background. So it has to look at where you are at the moment. What's the current situation? And that should be based on assessments. And we've covered all kinds of assessments during this series of webinars in the course. And those assessments should really have involved all the staff, managers, curators, scientists, collection managers, technicians, assistants, corporate and support staff, so you know exactly where you're at the moment. And then you need to have a high-level aim, so a statement about where you want to be. What are you trying to achieve in the next 5 years? It's one statement. Where do you want to be? And then a list of objectives, you might call them goals, clearly stated, that will contribute to achieving the overall aim. So it's basically the aim broken down into smaller bits. And then you need to prioritize your objectives or your goals, because you might not have the time and the staff and the money to do all of them. So you can look at them and you can say, this is our highest priority, next, next, next. It's very important to prioritize. And then you also need an implementation plan. So you might have your aim and your objectives, but how are you going to make it work? That's your implementation plan. It's usually over a 5-year period. And then you break that down into annual plans and targets. And that plan should include details about time frames. So how long will it take? What's the deadline, roles and responsibility? Who's going to be involved? What are they going to do? And then funding, how much is this going to cost? And is there anything else we need? Any other equipment that we might need to get? So what are we going to need? And that's the only way you're going to make progress. So basically what your plan is, it's pulling all the actions that you highlighted in the different assessments that you've done. So we gave a template for how to do a health and safety assessment for staff working in collections, and there were ways of identifying mitigation. There's a risk assessment for the collections and mitigation and all kinds of actions to mitigate the major risks. Disaster management planning. You need to look at the collections. There's a template for collections, a template for dry collections, to try and see where your needs are. And then you need to know about your data, what's the current state of the data, and what needs to be done. So you're going to put all of those things that were highlighted as needing to be done into one plan. And there might be some other things that you're also planning, but all of it goes into one document. So you're not trying to work from 8 different documents to figure out what needs to be done. So where do you start with this? So as we said, the assessment. So do that current situation analysis. Do the assessments if you haven't done them. Some of you have done them as part of the course. But if you haven't, the templates are all there on the NSTF website under the assignments, and it takes you through everything you need to check against. So for example, there's a document. So which policies, procedures, standards, forms, which of those have you got? Which ones do you need to review and revise? And which ones do you need to do from scratch? So there is a list of all the documents that are needed. And you can check off against there and make notes and comments. Then the risks to collections. Have you done that assessment of all the risks? And it's against those 10 agents of deterioration or destruction for collections. And you should have done some, or if you haven't done it yet, you will see that there's a way of looking at which are the biggest risks, which ones will have the biggest impact. And then there's also a way of looking at mitigating factors or mitigating actions that you need to take to reduce or remove those risks. And then you can also look at the standards for different kinds of collections. So what should you be doing in terms of storage and caring for wet and for dry collections? So that's the risks. That's a big section. And then the disaster management, there's also an assessment. So to go and look at what are the potential disasters for this collection. And then what are your plans? So what do you need to put in place? And then health and safety. So have you done a health and safety risk assessment? Have you identified the hazards that are there that need to be managed and monitored and controlled? What needs to happen routinely to manage those hazards for staff, and what interventions are needed? So there are templates for all of those 4 areas on the website. And that will help you identify what needs to be done. We don't have templates for these, but access, are all the registers in place? Your visitor register, your loan register, are they up to date, or do you need to go back and address backlogs? Are there backlogs in integrating returned loans? Maybe you've got things sitting there that have been waiting for 6 months, 8 months, a year. Have you got a backlog in loans to send out, or are they all up to date? Are all your loan reminders up to date? Is everything up to date on the database where you manage your loans? Is there anything else to do with that? Are the specimen data sets accessible on your website? So is your data, or are your data accessible, or are they on GBIF? And that should really be a plan for all institutions over the next 3 to 5 years. You should have all your data up on GBIF. And then there should also be a way of updating or completing those data. And what about images? Are they accessible? What's the plans for those? Are you going to be imaging? What are you going to do with those images? So there's a whole lot of planning around that, but you need to know what's the current situation. Your data management, what's the current situation with your data management? How much of the collection has been digitized, data captured from it? How many specimens still need to be captured? Are you using specifier brands? Are there issues with your database? Is it up to date? Are there any quality control things, or do you still need to do quality control? What about the georeferencing? Do you still need to do a whole lot of that? And then the specimen imaging. Acquisitions and disposals, so accessions and deaccessions. Are there backlogs in specimens waiting to be accessioned? So often institutions have 5-10-year backlogs in specimens that have not been accessioned. So how many are there? And then have you got specimens or collections that there's a problem with and that you'll never accession because there's no data? And how many of those? And then do you have a system for managing permits related to collections? Is there a code of ethics? And is there a way of checking that everything done in the collection is ethical? So that's looking, all of those are looking at where are we right now? And it's very difficult to plan without having that very clear understanding of what the issues are and what needs to be done. So then you also need to identify your aim and your objectives. And this means sitting around and saying, where are we going? What is our 5-year, what is our 10-year aim overall? And it might be something like to ensure that the collections are managed in a way that meets the requirements specified in the manual. Or if you don't like that aim, then you could say to manage and care for the collections according to global best practice. So you can see it's a high-level statement. And then your goals or objectives, you can list them. These are just examples. It's not what you have to have. It's just the kind of thing. So it can be to develop all your recommended documents and have a management system for the documents, to understand and manage all your major curation-related risks for the collection, to have a full data set representing all specimens in the collection and ensure that this is in appropriate software and regularly updated and used for managing the collection. And before they manage and increase access to collections for research, capacity development, and public awareness. So this would cover your loans and visitors and data. But you can see there's an intention, increase use, but manage it properly as well. And then number 5, ensuring that the staff working in the collections are not exposed to unmanaged and unnecessary hazards. You might say, well, that's not really relevant to curating the collections or managing the collections, and it falls under someone else. Okay, all right. So we're looking at some potential objectives or goals that will help you reach your aim. It's the health and safety, the ethics and legal requirements, and then also I put in here. Okay, I'm back, I think. Okay. Sorry, don't know what the problem is today. Okay, then the last objective that I had there was expanding the collection in a strategic way. so that only collections and specimens that contribute to the research value are accepted, and only when they can be properly cared for. So you might word that differently, but most of the collections are expanding. And so, you know, it's a matter of having a strategy or knowing where you're going with that. Okay, so those goals or objectives, the way they stated there, are also quite high level. And so you need to break them down further. So if you just look at objective 2, to understand and manage all the major curation related risks, there's a whole lot in there. And so you need to break it down. So this is the risk management, managing the 10 agents of deterioration and destruction. And it'll deal with storage, temperature and humidity control, topping up ethanol levels and correcting concentrations if it's a wet collection, pest management if it's a dry collection, cleaning, label checking, fire detection and suppression, and what you need to do with those. So you'll have to break down those objectives further. Monitoring program for risks, also under objective 2. And objective 4, manage and increase access. So you've got to break that down, and it might be things like increasing access, so open data and images, excellent service to users. And even there, you'll break that down again. So you're going to break down, keep breaking down until it's a very, very specific, clear action that's needed. So once you've done the assessment, once you've got the aim and objectives, you have a list of specific actions under each objective or sub-objective. So each point in the list must be very specific. So you don't say pest management as your final action. You're rather going to say like monitoring your sticky traps and recording results. That's one action. Checking drawers for signs of pests. That's another action. Treating in each infestation according to procedure. That's another action. So it must be that level of action that you eventually break down to. And you can identify which actions are routine and ongoing. So you have to do them. You're always going to have to do them. There's no end date for it. So like monitoring pests or topping up ethanol, it's always going to happen. It's routine, ongoing. And other things will be interventions. Other actions will be an intervention. It might need to be done just once. So dealing with a backlog of unaccessioned specimens. It's a project, it'll have an end date, you will finish that backlog. Data capture for your existing specimens, it's a project, there's an end to it, it will finish. So those are interventions. Installation of a fire door, that's a once-off thing. It's done and it's finished, it's not ongoing. And it's quite important to separate these two things because it influences how you develop your plan. So then you have to develop an implementation plan. And this is often where things, people have a strategy, but they don't have the implementation plan. So for each of those actions, you need to say, what is the 5-year target? And it's a number or a percentage or a frequency. So how often if it's a routine action. So you have to set those targets. You need to look at what do you need for each action to be completed, the staff and the funds and anything else. And you have to work with what you've got or very likely to get. So there's no point in developing a plan that's so ambitious, but you'll never have enough staff or you'll never have enough money to implement it properly. And you've got to think, how much of people's time will it take? And how much annual budget do we get? And what does it need to cover? And then you've got to look at your 5-year plan and spread the activities and targets across each year so that implementation is feasible. So think about the goal. So if you said we're going to have our whole collection data captured in the day, and still to capture, it's 10,000 specimens a year. If the goal is to have 80% captured, then the number per year must reflect. If it's to remove the risks associated with plastic bottles, how many need to be replaced? And you don't have to spread it over 5 years. Maybe it's urgent enough that you put all your resources and you get it done in 2 years. You've got to think about how you spread these things out. Put the names of the responsible people against each activity and target, and think about how much time will each staff member need to have to do that task. Is it a week, a year, 2 weeks, 6 weeks? In a year, how long will it take them? If they do it all day, every day. Check and see, are all the staff who work in the collection included in this plan? Maybe there's some that are not. Then you've got to figure out, well, what are they actually doing? And they should be in the plan. And think about, can staff be moved around to complete high priority projects? So for example, if you've got a whole lot of plastic bottles, they're rotting, they're cracking, they're in a terrible state, the collection's at high risk, you might need to pull the entomology staff to come and help with that wet collection until it's done. Pull people from other collections to come and help for a short space of time, for some of their time. So it's a matter of working as a unit rather than splitting and fragmenting. So this is just an example. You could have a very different template or very different layouts. But if we just look at that first objective, to develop all the policies, procedures, and standards document for the collection and develop a document management system. So this would mean you have your list of documents, a register, you set it up, and what is needed, what we have, and you can track it like that. The second one, you have all your standards and procedures for policy documents. So you need standards and procedures for your documents. You've developed all of those and your workflows, and you know which gaps need to be addressed, and you plan to address them. All your policies, all your procedures developed and approved. So even though this is a 5-year plan, if you don't have those documents in place, it's very difficult to do anything else. And so it should really be a priority to try and achieve it in 1 to 2 years. So this is a kind of breakdown by year, who's going to be involved, how much money, how many staff. And then this would be a new document development. So you know which, you can plan how you're going to break it down. Are you going to do all your policies first, then all your standards, then all your workflows, or you're going to do everything for chapter by chapter by chapter. So it's again thinking about how you're going to tackle it and how you're going to spread it out and who's going to be involved in, and what are they going to do. And then, so that'll be the plan for objective 1, the plan for objective 2, addressing the risks. So you've got to think about all the things to put in here. Are you going to be replacing plastic bottles and lids in a wet collection? Have you got overcrowded jars on the shelves? Have you got barriers on all your shelves? Do you need to line the shelving with cushioning for specimens sitting directly on them? What are you going to do about your specimens on the floor? Your temperature and humidity controls, all of these things, fire, light, disassociation, your relabeling, are all your collection shelves and cabinets and drawers numbered? And do you record all the locations of each specimen in your database? If you don't, then that should be built into your plan over the 5 years. And then topping up ethanol, checking concentration. So do you have a set schedule for doing this? Have you got Alcamon tablets? Do you need to put them in down? Do you have records for monitoring the concentration? And then your security, your disaster management plan. So start with the highest priority risks. When you did that assessment, when you do the assessment, the risk assessment, and the analysis of the risks, you'll have identified which ones will have the biggest impact and likely to happen very quickly and destroy a large proportion of the collection. So something like fire, deal with those high priority risks first. So all of those actions, you'll need a long list of them under objective 2. There's also, you'll put in there your routine work. So not only interventions, but routine work. Cleaning, dusting of your specimens, of drawers, checking labels, monitoring temperature, regular checks of fire detection and suppression systems. So all of this must be in your plan. To have your data sets representing all the specimens. So you've got to think about what do we need to do. So there's routine. It's not a lot of routine. backing up the database, updating data. So when there's a location change in the storeroom, or change in identity or nomenclature, when you add new accessions, when you record deaccessions, those are kind of routine actions for data. But then there'll be quite a lot of actions that would be interventions. So it's like a project. So specimens not captured, dealing with your backlogs, quality control or upgrades for existing records. Are you planning anything like that? Georeferencing, are you planning a georeferencing program? Maybe you're migrating to Specify or Brahms. And maybe you're going to update the entire classification system or taxon backbone in that data set. So you must think about in the next 5 years, these are the things we need to do. And these are going to be the routine things that we do all the time on an ongoing basis. Then the fourth objective, to manage and increase access to collections. So your routine, you're always going to have loans, visitors, data and image requests on an ongoing basis. You won't know how many, but you might be able to estimate based on previous trends. So, you know, we send out 30 to 40 loans. It's going to take whoever this much time in the year to do that. You know, we get so many visitors. So you put those in your plans, even though they're not within your control, but it's a time commitment. But then you're going to also have your interventions that I've spoken about as well, and put these in your plan. So you're going to be addressing backlogs in any of these issues related to loans. So your health and safety, ensuring that staff working in collections are not exposed to unmanaged and unnecessary hazards. So you're going to have routine things, health and safety inspections and reports, whoever's responsible for that. Monitoring the hazards, so if you have fumes, if you have other dangers, toxins, field work, any of that kind of thing, it'll be an ongoing work. And then regular training. So training in health and safety is ongoing. First aid, it needs to be redone. Handling dangerous chemicals, people need to be reminded. New staff come in, interns come in, students come in, so ongoing training. But then interventions, like a once-off kind of thing. You might have to buy signage for where hazards are and install it. It's a once-off thing. Putting your first aid kits in, eye wash stations, showers, although you might be checking them as a routine activity. And you might have to procure the right kind of PPEs. So that all needs to go into your plan. And again, start with the high-risk hazards and the most impactful and feasible mitigation measures. So you might not be able to do everything, but you pick the ones that are going to remove most of the hazard or manage it the best. Or ones that are required by law. Some of these, it's a law, you have to do it. So check on those. And then objective 6. So you've got to think about all your permitting and all your ethics. And a big kind of routine is filing permits from accession specimens, applying for the necessary permits for loans or donations, and that can be Nagoya or CITES. You have to make sure that you implement the requirements for donations received. So is there proof of that the person donating is the legal owner? Do they have the collecting permits? Do they have CITES permits? If it's been, well, they won't need CITES permits. That's only for international. But anyway, you have to check all the documentation and make sure it's all filed and up to date. You have to register your institution for CITES and for TOPS, for threatened or protected species, with EFFE. And that has to be renewed every 3 years, or when the CEO or the director changes. So all of that must also be put in your plan. And then under objective 7, your strategic expansion of the collection in line with available resources and your scope of what your institution holds. So routine, it's unpredictable how many specimens will come in because you don't usually know who's going to donate and what size, but you know previous trends. If there's an especially big donation that comes in, you're going to have to build it into the plan when it's reviewed. And so you might have to reshuffle things to deal with accessioning a big donation. But then there'll be your interventions that we've spoken about, dealing with backlogs, how many need to be dealt with, what are the high priority ones, do these first, and then plan for the deaccessioning, those that need to be got rid of, which are the simplest ones, which ones can you get rid of quickly because it will get them out your space, get them off your hands, do those first. So once you've gone through all your objectives, you've broken it all down, you've put everything together, you've got your targets, your timeframes, you know who's going to be doing everything, you have to go back and check very carefully. Add up how much time each staff has been allocated in the plan. And you might find that within 1 year, you've given somebody 3 years' work. And then you have to rethink it. And then you also have to add up your budget. So you mark your budget that when you add everything up, it comes to 3 million Rand and your annual budget is 1 million. Again, you're going to have to think again, which ones can we not do? How do we deal with this? So you might need to reduce or even remove some actions. It's very important once everything's been put together to go back and actually add up time and money. And once you've done that, then you need to transfer activities and targets into individual staff performance agreements or work plans for the year. So the performance agreements of individual staff and what all the individual staff are doing must completely align with your plan. If it doesn't, your plan is going to go nowhere. So at this point, everybody should know what they're going to do. It's in their performance agreements, but you have to monitor and review. So on a quarterly basis, somebody, a manager, should check on progress with the activities and the targets and identify where there are challenges or where changes are needed. So maybe you get a big unexpected large collection as a donation. It can't be left sitting there. Now you might have to shuffle things around. But be careful not to throw everything else out to deal with one unexpected event, unless it's a major crisis. So this plan isn't static, but be careful that you don't go off onto the wrong road. So monitoring should include a physical inspection with the staff responsible. So there's no point in asking people, please send me a message telling me what you've done. It actually, there needs to be a physical check. And the staff assessment, again, actual progress made against the targets. You have to go look, you have to see the database, you have to see the rebottling, you have to check the records. And if you're a staff member, you have to be able to show these things to whoever's doing that inspection or that monitoring. And then every year, the plan will need to be reviewed. So things change. Staff leave, go on maternity leave. There's additional new staff. The budget goes up or the budget goes down. Equipment or infrastructure breaks. And opportunities, new opportunities come up for funding or something like that. So yeah, it has to be reviewed every year, that plan. So what are the challenges with planning and implementation? So you might be thinking, well, that all sounds great on paper and in a presentation, but sure, that's way above my pay grade. I'm a technician in the collection. You know. So it's simple to do a plan like this if it's one institution with essentially one collection. So if you just got one collection, you can do a plan and you don't have to think about too many other things. It becomes more complex if it's several different collections in one institution and they've each got different staff and you've got to try and put all of the information together in one plan. So you have to think about how your actions are arranged. You might have some actions that are at an institutional level and some actions that are at an individual collection level. So it can be a bit more complicated. But what do you do if if there's two people who manage and run and curate the whole collection? What are you going to do then? What if you don't have staff or budgets to do any kind of planning? I think in either of those cases, you can still do a simple plan. Think about, okay, it's only me, but where do I want to go in 5 years? Knowing that it's me and I'll get 10,000 Rand a year to curate this collection. Let me still understand where are the gaps, where are the challenges that need to be addressed. Let me make a plan to do that, even though it's just me and I've got a little bit of money. You can do a simple plan, even if it's just one of you in that collection. And then quite an important question is, what if the manager is not interested in any of this? They say, we've got our 5-year strategy, we've got our annual performance plan, we're not doing other plans. So you can do a smaller, simple plan just for your own collection. So maybe your institution is very resistant to having an overall collection management and curation plan covering all the collections. It doesn't stop you as somebody, you and maybe your little group of colleagues who work in a collection, still thinking about where are we, where do we want to go, what do we do, and then saying to your manager, put this into my performance agreement. This is what we're planning to do. So I think it's everybody's responsibility to think about planning, not only managers. Everybody can do plans, even if they're little simple ones. And it's important to remember that plan doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be 100% complete to start. It's just important to have something, some way of knowing where you're going and how you're going to get there. And you can work on it over time. It can be improved, and it probably will be. It won't be perfect when you first do it. It'll get better. So it's just also about thinking, everybody thinking about not just going to work every day and doing the same things over and over, not knowing where they're going. Think about it, and it gives you an additional kind of direction and challenge with your work. And reward. So you'll feel rewarded when you can see how much you've progressed and how much you've contributed. Right. Risk putting my video back on. This is just a summary of steps that need to be done. Okay. So yeah, just, you know, if you an institution, a collection, a little group of staff, even an individual staff, you can still go through these steps. Do the assessment. You've done this for the assignments already. Think about your aim and your objectives. Break down your objectives with your actions. Prioritize, say which are the most important ones. Set your targets. Break it down into 1-year sections. Assign staff or yourself and think about how long it will take you. Work out what's needed, how much time and how much money and anything else, and look at whether it's going to be feasible in 1 year. Maybe you need to spread it out over 3 or 5 years. Prioritize again. So keep looking at when you see, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, go back, prioritize. Put actions and targets into the staff performance agreements for the year, and then monitor your progress and identify challenges and obstacles and see if they can be addressed, and then review the plan and revise it critical. So those are the steps, the summary of the steps involved in collection management and curation planning, and implementation and monitoring. Okay. And I think the important thing to remember is that we are a community. The NSCF is a community. We all work together to develop that manual. Many of you are working together on the assignments for the course. You share knowledge and information. So we're working together. We're all in this together. And I think when it comes to the planning, it's also something we must work together on. And next year, we will be doing the collection assessment, that facilitated self-assessment process that we spoke about at the forum last month. And we can see what plans people have got and if they need assistance, and then we can put in place some kind of a process to help. But I think it's important to have a shot at it yourself, you know, at whatever level, and to start at least thinking about the plans, and then we'll work together and we'll get good plans done, and that will really help us succeed. And then just to say, we'll have the discussion forum next week on Wednesday, and we'll send out more information about that. So thank you very much. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. I don't see anything in the chat. So maybe this is just very overwhelming for people. But I hope if you just work through it slowly, it'll get easier to think through it. All right, so thank you for attending, and we'll be in contact about the discussion forum and a series of tutorials for the people doing the course, or anybody else you would like to get more input on the assignments, which are linked to assessments and planning anyway. So thanks from my side. I'll hand over to you, Fulu, to close.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I do agree. Maybe it was too overwhelming. That's why people are so quiet. Maybe also it's the time of the year. Everyone's just exhausted and want to go on a break. But thank you, everyone, for making time, even though we are in this time of the year. It's quite difficult to get excited about things. We just want to rest. So I hope this was helpful and you found it valuable, and it's things that you can take into your processes of implementing the manual and planning and all that. So thank you. We will close since there are no questions and no comments, and we'll see you next week Wednesday for the discussion forum as mentioned by Michelle. We'll try to send the invite either today or tomorrow. So thank you so much. Have a great day.